Hey everybody, welcome to Black Spring on this Tuesday. And if you're a newcomer, welcome for the first time. And welcome everybody to this Tuesday segment. Now, have you ever noticed that today that if you challenge the status quo or the establishment, you're considered to be a conspiracy theorist, right? But what about the church? Well, it looks like even the church could be permeable to some of the shadow influences, a sort of deep state. I'd like to bring you a story today. We have an interview from the TNA by Alex Newman, which features an interview with evangelical Thomas Littleton of Alabama.
So we're here with the Reverend Thomas Littleton. He's an evangelist, Southern Baptist down in Birmingham, Alabama. And Reverend Littleton has been on the front lines of exposing what he has referred to as the evangelical deep state. Naturally, being very curious and very concerned about the deep state ourselves here, we decided to pursue this further. And so we're very honored and very pleased to have the good Reverend with us. Reverend, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us. And tell us a little bit about what got you started on this mission of exposing the evangelical deep state. What is the evangelical deep state, and how did you come across it, and what got you involved in all this?
Well, probably I was tossed into the fray because it was affecting my own life and our church, our faith, a project I was doing in Georgia, which was overrun by trusting the National Park Service with a partnership with our project to do a historic Christian arts preservation. And once I saw the church was sort of MIA as we sought for allies to preserve what was basically a tsunami of the LGBT agenda under the Obama administration, I reached out to other pastors and churches, to my own Southern Baptist convention, and we couldn't find any allies. Suddenly the narrative had changed. No one was interested in opposing comprehensive sex ed or any of these old enemies, or realizing that they were lapsing into a lot of use of cultural Marxist ideologies and critical theory, these kind of things. And so suddenly I realized we're being overwhelmed, and people were not accepting or willing to discuss these issues. As a matter of fact, they were quite the contrary. They were hostile toward even bringing them up.
Yeah, and we did an article at the New American, I think last year, about kind of liberal forces within the Southern Baptist Convention, really having an organized effort to kind of take over the denomination, and that seems to have culminated with the election of J.D. Greear as president. In fact, I had him on my radar long before I became the head of the SBC, because I had watched a Bible study he put together, and he basically said, if your church doesn't have people of all different ethnicities and colors, then it's a bad church. And I'm thinking to myself, 99.9% of all the Christians throughout all human history have been in churches that don't have lots of colors and ethnicities and races. What is that even supposed to mean? And where in the Bible does God obsess about races? It all struck me as very weird. So when I came across some of the stuff you had done, it really struck a chord with me. Now I'm interested, Reverend. Could you share with us some of the names that you think are involved in this evangelical deep state, and what are some of the things that they're doing to kind of change the denomination? I know one of the things you've talked about, and that also has been concerning to me, is the injection of so-called critical race theory into the SBC, in fact, through a resolution. Tell us a little bit about this, and who are the characters behind it, and what are they up to?
Well, within the Southern Baptist Convention itself, probably the ringleader would be Albert Mohler. He's the head of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, which, by the way, he's running for president in Orlando in June to replace J.D. Greear for a 2-year stint as president. So he has a disciple or group of disciples, the most prominent probably being Russell Moore, who is head of the Ethics and Religious Liberties Commission. He came into office in the place of Richard Land, who was more of a stalwart conservative, but a few things, that were problematic in his later years. But for 25 years, Baptists looked to the ERLC as a very fixed conservative voice, and suddenly with the 2013 installation of Russell Moore, this Al Mohler disciple, everything changed. The narrative changed. We were accused of waging a culture war. We were told we lost. We were told we need to just stop the hateful rhetoric, love our gay and lesbian neighbors, and then suddenly all of these basically your standard victim coalitions began to be spoken of as essentially those whose needs we need to address with the gospel, and social justice is a core part of the gospel. And then by the time we get to the 2019 Birmingham Southern Baptist Convention, it was held here in my city, then we see a resolution that was submitted to condemn critical race theory and intersectionality by a California pastor, was turned by the Resolutions Committee, which are a group of guys primarily who were from Mohler Seminary that were running that resolution committee, and they turned that condemnation into an affirmation of critical race theory. And that's been a very divisive issue, along with the Revoice Conference, which is for LGBT thriving. So a host of things going on within the Southern Baptist Convention. Also the creep of money from Now We've Proven Paul Singer, a big LGBT funder. His money is creeping in. Also the Soros funding through the immigration reform organization. So it's a pretty perilous place for the Southern Baptists to be, and most people in Pew are not even aware this is going on.
Yeah, and when you talk about Al Mohler, you still and actually when I wrote my article, I got a lot of pushback from SBC pastors from all across the country. Oh, I know that this kind of stuff is getting into the church, but Al Mohler's not involved. I mean, Al Mohler is Mr. Conservative. He's theologically pure. And listen, here's a thing where he talks about how what God thinks about homosexuality. How dare anybody accuse him of harboring these liberal tendencies? What do you make of that argument? How is it that so many within the SBC still think of Al Mohler as this conservative stalwart when you're telling us that actually he's one of the ringleaders bringing this liberalism into the church?
Well, Mohler was, before the conservative resurgence and even those early years, that a group who sort of saved the Southern Baptists from liberalism in the 70s, he was considered to be a liberal himself. He didn't believe in the key issue of the conservative resurgence, which is inerrancy. He was egalitarian, which means he was for women's ordination, which brings on a host of other issues. But then suddenly he appeared from at the Georgia Index, a local state Baptist paper, writing as this conservative, and then climbed the ladder within a couple of years to the head of Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. So he has sort of been the captain of the Reform doctrine resurgence, and then, of course, he hooked up with guys like Tim Keller of the Presbyterian Church of America in the Gospel Coalition, which is really a very emergent movement theologically and a very leftward-leaning political movement. So these things crystallized really by about 2010, but as you say, there are a lot of people that still don't want to accept where this stuff is coming from or Al Mohler's part in it. But we see that over and over, that when you trace these things back, he is at the epicenter of these compromises.
Yeah, interesting. So, I know you wrote a really interesting open letter to the church. I hope people who watch this will go check it out. It's long, but it's documented with links. It's well worth your time. I hope people will go check it out. Real quick, we've only got a couple of minutes left here. So I want to, in just the last 2 minutes that we have, I wonder, Reverend, if you would talk about, first of all, the implications of this. What happens if these last bastions of kind of conservative Christianity in America, the SBC and the PCA and some of these more conservative denominations, what happens if they fall? What are the implications of that, both for the church in America and also just for the nation, for the political landscape, for elections and things like that, and also what are some effective things that Christians could do in their own churches? Say there's a member of an SBC church or somebody in a PCA church. What are some things that they could do right now? Maybe they're an elder, maybe they're just a regular old member. What could they do to fight back against the influence of this evangelical deep state?
Well, it will affect the gospel and how we are able to engage the gospel in the culture, whether we're able to fully preach the message of Christ and repentance from issues that become more issues politicized, like the LGBT issue or immigration, so forth. So it affects the mission of the church and its vision. It affects everybody politically, because it's not a bad thing that conservative evangelicals have been able to have such a voice in the culture and in the political realm. That's been a very healthy offset to the flood tide of liberalism. Everyone needs to engage their pastor, see where they are on this. They need to engage their own kids and their family, and they need to pray and really commit to seeing this thing through, that we need to be salt and light in our culture. And that's a healthy thing. That's the part of the call of God on every Christian. And if we don't do it, we're at the tipping point, really past the tipping point. There's a lot that could be lost.
Very good, Reverend. And where can people find more? Have you got a website or social media where people can find you?
Yes, my blog is 30piecesofsilver.org. 30 pieces of silver, spell it out, .org.
Very good. Well, Reverend, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for spending time with us, and God bless you.
Thank you. God bless you, Alex.
All right, thanks so much for tuning into that clip. But I just wanted to, just FYI, I mean, President Trump has taken a pretty strong frontline approach to protecting religious freedoms and the practice of religion from the very beginning of his presidency. Not to mention, during his State of the Union address, he mentioned that he was going to be putting together bills and approaches that would protect the constitutional right to pray, and then that would, of course, that would affect public places and spaces such as the schools and, of course, other parts of our society. Not to mention, he also signed an executive order that limited the enforcement of the Johnson Amendment, which prohibits adverse action against individuals who choose to speak on or worship or speak about moral issues in public, in church, and many areas, because many of those rights, the 501c, has been threatened by many forces and threatened by some establishments, if you will. But also, I'd like to just tag out with a quote. For one, quote, "Our founders understood that no right is more fundamental to a peaceful and prosperous and virtuous society than the right to follow one's religious convictions." President Donald J. Trump. Also, we can look like nationwide, we can look worldwide to find many examples in which this type of ideology is seeping into many of our social constructs, religious constructs, and seeping into values. All these postmodern ideas and postmodern attacks on religion, on nationalism. You can even find, we had, the Pope held a meeting a few months ago, or at least a couple of months ago, in which he actually challenged many people to, forego or give up your sovereignty and throw all of your efforts and throw your trust into the climate faith, because that's the best way to protect humanity and the the disasters of humanity or the human conditions, that the states were no longer enough to protect that. So as always, let me know what your thoughts, your concerns, your comments are, and please hit the subscribe button or hit the bell, because that does help you get notifications on videos and upcoming panels, as well as just keeping in touch with Black Spring with Autumn. It also helps with conservative voice suppression and much, much more. So I thank you so much for being here, and I will see you again next time on Black Spring with Autumn.